Okay, so today I'd like to talk a little bit about the disasters that is the American system of jurisprudence and our so-called democracy or representative, what do you call it? Oh, hell. Not representative dictatorship, although that would probably be more accurate. What is it called? Officially representative federalist, some bullshit. I don't know, whatever name you give to it. It kind of represents the whole problem, which is that words are an opportunity for people to interpret what you're saying in any way they choose. One has to be careful when speaking because it simply offers other people the opportunity to put thoughts in your head by interpreting what you say in a way that they decide makes sense to them, whether they're honest or dishonest, or rational or irrational, or accurate or inaccurate, whatever. You know, they can believe that you're thinking that you're about to do anything they want to do. And the wonderful thing about this whole system here is saying that we'll read the Constitution and interpret it literally, opens the Constitution up to quote unquote literal interpretation in any number of ways, saying that we can then, take the Constitution and adapt the terms and contents of the Constitution in a way which is consistent with our society, opens people the opportunity to interpret our society as well as the Constitution. So in any case, let's just get to the raw point here. And the point here is that our system is just fucked. It's just that simple. People talk about how our system is racist because of the sentencing that's disproportionate. Blacks get disproportionately long sentences, or disproportionately charged with a certain number of crimes, and investigated, apprehended, incarcerated more severely based on their race. But the problem is that this actually has a feedback effect for whites too. It also is detrimental to whites. It's detrimental to all Americans because we end up having a completely distorted legal system, and people think that certain people should get off lightly for things, and certain people think that certain people should be punished more severely for things. The end result of this whole system is a system of pure subjectivity. Just look at this case here. Who in their right mind thinks that a 17-year-old kid should get 13-year jail sentence for murdering a classmate? Now, why they murdered the classmate, who the classmate was, under what conditions they murdered the classmate, who they were, what their background was, all that kind of stuff, that all weighs into sentencing, sure, right. But a guy who stabs a girl to death in cold blood, or you could say in the heat of passion, the heat of rejection, either way, in the middle of the school, in the hallway, in front of all the other students in school, because she wouldn't go on a prom date with him. She wouldn't go on a prom date with him. He stabs her to death in the middle of school. He gets 13 years. 13 years. The girl is 17 years old. He has gotten less of a jail sentence for this than she has lived. And she's 17. She's not 40, she's 17. Okay? This guy has no business on the streets anywhere for, quite a long period of time, but certainly, 25 years, he'd then be 40, 43 or 42 or something when he's out. 43 is not that old. He shouldn't have to go to jail for 50 years just because he was 17 and killed a girl because she rejected him for a prom. Really? Really? How long should he have to go to jail? Really? How long should he have to go to jail for killing a 17-year-old girl who supposedly was at least a friend of his because she went on to the prom with somebody else than him. How long should this guy have to stay in jail? I would think a little bit longer, 13 years. But in any case, let's look at some other issues, legal issues going on in this country today. Recently, there was a case very recently this past week of a woman who's a pro-gun activist in Florida, and she's been on the internet touting gun activism, talking about how she enjoys her Second Amendment rights, especially based upon the government and what it's doing to the United States. And lo and behold, her 4-year-old kid, who she apparently has been out taking to gun ranges and has shot 22 pistols or rifles, somehow this kid ended up in the backseat of her car behind her with a .45 handgun and shot her through the back of the car. And shot her through the back seat. She's lucky enough to survive getting shot by her son, and lo and behold, she's now facing felony charges for allowing her 4-year-old son access to a loaded firearm, getting shot by the kid. She's lucky the kid didn't kill her, but she's going to lose her Second Amendment rights now because a felony is enough to have your gun rights suspended under federal firearms law. So kiss it all goodbye. A feather in the hat for all the gun control activists out there, all the people who say that people who have kids should never have guns around or in the house or anything like that. There's just too many things that can go wrong. The risk is too great. Well, this woman's now going to be your poster child. The whole issue is, how can you be a gun rights activist and allow your kid to shoot you with a handgun? The problem is that if you're a gun rights activist, ultimately at some point you have to concede that other people than you can actually be trusted with firearms, and sometimes you're going to be wrong. The more people who have firearms, the more likely you're going to be wrong at that point. Someone is going to do something with a firearm that they shouldn't do, and it's going to be a counterexample of your entire point. Gun control activists have to also agree that at some point someone is going to do something illegal, which is going to justify gun carry and gun ownership and the Second Amendment. But let's take a slightly different point. Suppose the issue of concern isn't guns. Suppose the issue of concern is very simply that someone was killed by some way other than with a gun and by some way other than through confrontation. There's a case that's rolling through, I guess it's New York State Court now, involving a guy who's recently been sentenced for 12 years for involuntary manslaughter of a police officer. He was driving drunk. Cop pulled him over. They were both standing on the side of the road. The guy was given some kind of field sobriety test, and somebody else plowed into their car, probably, possibly another drunk driver. The guy was charged with homicide or manslaughter because he instigated the traffic stop by driving drunk, and therefore is being held accountable for the death of the officer involved in the traffic stop. Now, just think about that mind-boggling logic, okay? If that is the case, okay, why isn't any indirect consequence of any crime also the legal consequence of the person who caused the direct consequence of having the police officer arrive on the scene? So we have to have a close look at this. You want to talk about direct consequences? Hey, Erin Andrews is in the news talking about the direct consequence of the Marriott Hotel allowing or giving this guy her room number. Well, he knew she was in the hotel. That's why he went into the hotel to get a room. All they did was give him the room number. So he got the room number. He won the room next to hers. It was occupied or wasn't ready when he first requested it. And So he went upstairs, checked it out. I mean, he was dedicated, stalker. Went up there, checked it out, found out the room was ready, came back down, requested a room. They gave him the room. He modified the peephole in the room, the door between the rooms, and he got this video. Okay, but he got this video. Okay. And Erin Andrews sued him and the hotel. Okay, in civil court, because she felt emotionally damaged by the fact that this people video went viral on the internet, that she'd been seen naked prancing around in her hotel room by tens of millions of people. And also, she felt her security, personal security, had been violated, and she didn't feel safe. She didn't feel safe traveling unless she went through a whole slew of precautions after she went through this whole situation, which she hadn't gone through before. And if she had gone through them before, she wouldn't have been videotaped dancing around in her hotel room. But somehow the stalker and Marriott were responsible for her issues, but not herself. Okay, so anyway, the court said, hey, fine. The jury said, fine, we'll give you $55 million. Half of it will be payable by this guy who's a stalker who took the video. The other half of it will be paid by Marriott, because they said, hey, she's in room 1018, and yes, you can have room 1019. Okay, that's a $55 million settlement split both ways. Okay, obviously, Marriott should pay half of the settlement for just giving out two simple pieces of information. Okay, but now also what happened was Erin Andrews' career took off after that, because she had so much more public, she was so much of a public figure after that. Yes, while people were saying to her, I've seen your naked, I've seen your crotch, blah, 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 she also had to admit that a lot more people knew who she was, and she was much more of a draw on TV for ESPN and Fox News, who signed her to larger and larger and larger contracts after that. Okay, so now, question. Are Marriott and the stalker responsible for that also? Do they get part of the positive benefit for what happened as a result of their actions? So now, moving on, we'll look at Hulk Hogan, and he's in the same situation. He had a friend who did a friendly thing to him and set him up in the sex tape sting. The guy, he's saying the guy actually gave him a condom and pushed him and his wife to a bedroom. Okay, never occurred to him that maybe the guy was secretly videotaping the ensuing sex and would then pitch it for sale on the internet. Apparently never occurred to him until he found out that that's exactly what had happened, and then tried to convince other online media outlets not to put the tape online. And of course they said, hey, look, buddy, sorry, we're going to make millions off of this. It's going to happen. And they went ahead and put it online. And now, I'll be honest with you, I've never heard of anyone successfully suing an online entity for publishing a sex tape that was sold to them. I don't care whether it was an illegally obtained tape or a legally obtained tape. They're still going to publish it. The problem is, once it gets out in the public domain, once somebody goes out there and sells that tape, okay, they're just buying the tape. Are you going to say that they shouldn't buy the tape because it was illegal? The tape was created illegally? Are you going to say that they shouldn't put it online once they buy it? Under what legal grounds do you have to say this? How are they supposed to verify the authenticity of that tape, or whether Hogan agreed to it and changed his mind? Whether he knew it was being filmed or not, how are you supposed to verify that? And in the end, who really cares? Honestly, what matters is that he did have sex with this guy's wife, and he doesn't want anybody to know about it. And that's what really cares. That's what really matters. So, okay, fine. So Gawker put the tape online. Hogan wants to drag him into court and sue for damages because he's embarrassed, because his his friends and other friends and family, say, "Oh, you got a sex tape," blah 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 blah. That's not what ended his career. The funny thing about it is his own mouth is what caused Hulk Hogan to lose his contract with WWE, by issuing all these racist comments. But he's got time to go and sue Gawker for publishing a tape which he participated in the making of quite willing, even though he didn't know it was a sex tape. He certainly participated in the sexual part of it quite willingly. And it was recorded and it was outed, and that's how it is. Where is the grounds for him to complain about the fact that it was published? Seriously. Did he say to this woman, "I won't have sex with you if you record it. If you had told me that you're recording it, I would never have had sex with you"? I mean, seriously. What they did was a criminal act, yes. But the fact that that tape was sold and put online, that's not a criminal act. That's why they're in civil court. And this is the problem. Should we now say to Hulk, that these people should be sued because you're embarrassed, even though it really didn't affect your career that much? I don't know. He's suing him for $100 million. No, he's suing him for half of what Erin Williams got, Erin Andrews got in her settlement with Marriott and this guy. He's suing them for twice that much. On what basis does he think that his case is worth twice as much as the settlement for this other case where this woman was stalked and recorded in her hotel room without her knowledge, under the assumption that she was in a private room? We don't know. I don't know. It's just, where's the logic? I have no idea. The best I can tell you is that Erin Williams' attorneys based their claims, their financial claim for damages, on the assumption that $1 expense should be spread among this estimated 16 to 17 million people who had actually seen the video online and going forward. And then punitive damages were assessed as double that and so forth. Hulk Hogan's team is going to base their claim on the estimated views that Gawker had as a result of these showing the video, and then estimate the benefit that Gawker had as a result of each page click. So fine, okay. We have essentially opened a door to arbitrary claims for damages in a situation where there's no clear damage other than to the plaintiff's pride, in the situation, in the case. We're not talking about somebody who's actually hurt, injured, or killed. We're talking about somebody who was embarrassed by what happened in the case. So what if somebody actually was hurt in the case, okay? How do we deal with that, either in terms of criminal action or in terms of civil action? We moved to a case in New York City where two New York City cops were doing a vertical stairwell patrol in a housing project, and one of the cops discharged their firearm out of fear, striking a door. The bullet ricocheted down the hallway and then struck a victim in the chest. The victim then was bleeding to death. The two cops were rookies. Neither one performed CPR on the victim while they were waiting for an ambulance. And it came out that their CPR training was falsified. The CPR instructor was therefore fired. The partner who did not fire his weapon was fired for cheating on the CPR exam. The cop who actually fired his weapon was fired for cheating on a CPR exam, even before the case came to a close and a judgment was reached. And in this case, he was found guilty of manslaughter. He'll still be open to a civil charge case, just like most cases where a police officer is found guilty of criminal charges. So why isn't the New York City Police Department being found to be culpable in this by not checking to ensure that the officer received adequate training for and was partnered adequately? They're not supposed to go up with two rookies. You're supposed to go rookie and experienced partner. So there are numerous instances of issues of police protocol that were not followed. And there was no verification that the CPR training was actually being given out correctly, that the recruits were being trained correctly, they're being put on the street, all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of issues involved here. So the question now becomes, what about the government's exposure in cases like this? The next thing that we look at if we start talking about indirect exposure is, well, what if there is a calamity, a large-scale calamity? There's a lot of debate going on now about exactly what the Egyptian government's responsibility is, considering how the Egyptian equivalent of the TSA allowed some Islamic terrorists to board a plane in Egypt or Somalia, well, at least in Somalia. Let's talk about that first. And carry a bomb on the plane, which he fortuitously detonated at too low of an altitude for the plane to suffer from explosive decompression. The hole ripped in the wall of the plane only sucked him out of the plane, and he fell down to the ground and was killed. Luckily, none of the other 100 some odd passengers on the plane were killed. The plane was not destroyed, that kind of thing. Not the only incident, okay? But you say, oh, it's in Somalia. Okay, let's talk about Egypt. Egypt is where the Russian flight originated from last summer, going back to Russia, that was destroyed in midair. There's an Air Asia flight, at least one, where it's been missing for 2 years. Oh, this is Egypt. Oh, this is Indonesia. Okay, fine. Let's talk about Turkey. Okay. Woman hides a child in a carry-on bag, takes that bag on the flight. How could she possibly have gotten a child on a plane on a carry-on flight? Carry-on bag on a plane. How could she possibly have snuck that child on the plane? Well, obviously the child was either put in the bag after it went through pre-flight inspection, pre-boarding inspection, or the child was in the bag before it went through pre-boarding inspection, or else the woman was given the bag with the child after she had gone through pre-boarding inspection. All of these things indicate certainly a massive failure of security, either by the airport or by Air France or both, okay? The child was found on the plane when it got out of the bag. Passengers observed the child getting out of the bag and notified the air crew, and that's a little bit too late, okay? That child could have been a bomb. That bomb could easily have gone off at altitude, and that plane could easily be missing right now, somewhere between, well, not missing, but it could have been on the ground somewhere right now, but somewhere between Turkey and wherever it was coming down. It looks like wherever that plane is, it's on the notes here. You can read it better than I can. Okay, fine. At what point do we start to sue the government for these failures that result in large-scale death? Now, what happens if we start to look at 9/11, for instance, okay? 9/11, plenty of people died, lots of damage. You know, are these victims suing the United States government for the security failures that resulted in 9/11? No, didn't happen. Never happened. Never gonna happen. The government of the United States has taken a very lenient position when it comes to the government exercising this incredible amount of power in the name of public safety. But at the same time, it is also given itself more and more immunity from its failures. And we have a whiplash effect where we want to blame more and more people for more and more things, but we're less and less able to hold the government accountable for what it does wrong or what it fails to do. But the government is more and more capable of monitoring our lives and tracking what we do and accusing us preemptively and arresting us preemptively and so forth and so on. We look at a situation like this. Here's a guy beats up a New York Police Department sergeant during a traffic stop. He gets into an altercation with the sergeant at a traffic stop, beats him up. Where in what county did getting out of your car and manually fighting a police officer result in him getting arrested instead of killed? Okay? The news, it just starts to become completely mind-boggling. Woman raped, kidnapped and raped as bystanders drive by in full public view. Woman's being raped in her car. No one stops to intervene. The guy rapes a woman in her car. No one intervenes. Nobody. No one. Just watches her gets raped and calls the cops, but nothing. No one involves. No one actually gets involved in the situation. Can you imagine watching a woman get raped in public and no one does anything to help her? Well, there's a good point. Maybe they might get sued by the guy if he gets hurt in the process. Who knows? There used to be a time, man, when somebody would do anything like this, there'd be 50 people that would beat the hell out of the guy. Now we have a society where nobody wants to actually get involved unless there's almost no chance that they are going to be arrested or sued for getting involved. So we end up with things like, teenage girls beating the hell out of a woman, killing her in her own house, and posting it on the internet. Because unless the cops get involved, hey, what the hell? We're just gonna go buck wild. We're gonna go crazy. But then the other problem is that sometimes when the police do get involved, sometimes it's the police that cause the problem, and the police that are going buck crazy. And you read about these police forcing women to have sex in the back of the car, police running these prostitution rings, the police are escorting drug dealers. I mean, you can't trust anyone. And the real thing I think you have to worry about is you can't trust anyone to never commit a crime, whether it's frat boys hazing their own kind, or an 8-year-old boy beating up a 6-year-old girl, or 12-year-old kids in school having sex with 8-year-old girls in the school bathrooms, or the school teacher promoting this shooting video of it and selling it on the internet, or a kid who decides, hey, today I don't feel like going to school. I don't care how many times you bug me, Mom, I'm going to kill you. Then I got to kill Dad. Then I'm going to kill my 2 brothers and sisters. And then, you just end up with this whole cycle of ridiculous crime for the fact that the penalties are so lenient. These kids are getting away with, if they ever get caught in the first place, they're getting away with murder, literally. And also the simple fact that you have a legal system which is so convoluted and complex, and people who just are totally out of touch with the law, that they don't even understand when they get raped themselves. Okay. Meanwhile, on the other hand, they're scrambling about women's rights and more protection for women and all this kind of stuff. But at the same time, they don't even understand what rape actually means legally in a system where we have laws on the book everywhere about rape. They don't even take the time to read them before they go out and write articles about rape for Women's Magazine. It's crazy. And it's no question in my mind with this abundance of focus of blaming other people for their problem, for people blaming somebody else for their problems, ducking responsibility on their own. It goes up and down the spectrum, but there's only one group of people in the United States that has the power to say definitively that X has a responsibility, Y has an obligation, Z has no responsibility, and A has no obligation, and that's the justices in the various courts of the United States. And when they start making these absolutely boneheaded, silly, stupid decisions because ultimately their client is the government of the United States of America, not the people. Okay. Ultimately, they make decisions in the interests of the government, not of the people. Okay. When we have an inherent contradiction between our government and our rights, how can you be surprised when our rights are absolutely blown away? The courts are given almost complete authority to make any kind of boneheaded decisions they want to make. And anybody who complains about it is labeled a traitor or nearly a traitor. How can we really complain about our own country when anyone who complains about what happens in our country or what our government does is labeled a traitor? Well, here's one way to do it. Find an old white guy. Okay? And look, that's what these people have done in Donald Trump. They have found an old white guy who complains about the government, who's already basically assumed to be a pile of shit by the liberal elitist media, who, because he's a businessman, has no touch with so many minority groups and so many ethnic groups and so many economic groups. Doesn't care. Ban up behind him. Hey, you're the epitome of America. You're a white male in your 60s. How can you possibly be blamed for being a racist, elitist, pro law enforcement, pro criminal justice, pro repression asshole? How can you possibly be blamed for it? Well, surprisingly, somebody actually was blamed for it. Somehow, some guy decided that they were going to take a free punch at somebody who was being escorted away from a Trump rally. And this guy was videotaped doing it, was interviewed afterwards bragging about it, was interviewed afterwards saying how we may have to kill him the next time he comes in. And sure enough, somehow, at some point, somewhere, somebody in the DA's office found this tape and arrested the guy. What'd they arrest him for? Assault. They arrested him for simple assault and also for making a terroristic threat, but basically for simple assault. And what the guy did was he punched a guy who was completely unaware of his presence out of nowhere at a Trump rally and got away with it for quite a long time. And then he's got charged with assault, which is a simple misdemeanor, your lowest level misdemeanor. It wasn't assault, it was assault and battery. The guy literally waited for him to come by and punched him or elbow clocked him or elbow shot him or whatever he did. But it was clear he's not even being charged with what he did. He's being charged with like the lowest crime for what he possibly could have been charged for. But hey, right there on tape, we see what happens. And on the other end of the spectrum, you still have these guys, a slew of guys who are coming out of jail, 25 years after they've been wrongfully convicted of crimes by a government which suppressed evidence for the defense. That's all still going on. These cases are all still being reviewed. And let me tell you something, man. When you look at the judges in the United States, they think they're doing a great job because they're undoing, decades of racial repression. But undoing it when it's egregious, well after the fact, and in the process, still committing racial oppression, although that's not quite so egregious, is still perpetuating the racial oppression. It's still perpetuating oppression against the people of the United States. Simply easing up on your foot doesn't really make the situation better. It just casts it in stone. It's a question of how much the guy should have been charged for, whether or not he would have been found guilty anyway, that kind of thing. And this is what it really comes down to. They'll have to have the prosecution decide whether or not they're going to retry this case. And okay, fine. So the guy's defense lawyer wasn't told that the witness initially fingered somebody else. That doesn't mean he's not guilty. And what it's going to come down to is the fear of the public that this guy actually did it, and the fear that he might get away with murder on a technicality. And that's the same old song and dance that keeps a lot of minorities locked up, A lot of minorities getting arrested, a lot of minorities locked up, a lot of people pushed out of society, and a lot of people like this white kid, sorry to say it, but this white kid with the glasses, 13 years in jail for stabbing a girl to death in the middle of school. 13 freaking years. I don't know what you could possibly say to justify such a sentence. It's just crazy. Well, to be honest, it's actually easy to think of what to say that would justify this if you're stone cold racist. It's easy. The black guy who is obviously, in jail for murder for much longer than 13 years. Not only might he have actually done it, but he may have done something just as bad and not been caught before. He might do it again. You let him out now, he might kill somebody next week. And, the white kid, on the other hand, 17 years old, well, he's got a clean history. Everybody vouches for him. We're sure this is just a one-off incident, a case of puppy love gone extremely wrong. And, not only is there much less chance that he'll go out and kill somebody again than there would be for the average black defendant, but also we can't take 90% of the population and take the pessimistic view that they might go out and kill somebody. That just wouldn't work. But it's much easier and much safer to do that for 10% of the population. Now, you may not actually be a racist, but logically and in terms of the percentages, it makes sense to have that perspective. Minorities in this country suffer from the simple fact that they're minorities. It's that simple. In this country, we have a society which is taking more and more and more of a risk-based approach to law enforcement and judicial action, and minorities are simply going to get the short end of that stick. It's that simple. Now, to be fair, that last statement is a little bit too much of a summary. It's it summarizes it and it just kind of encapsulates things a little bit too closely. There are a number of legal issues involved, and a number of racial issues, a number of societal issues involved. Certainly, okay? But also, there are legitimate, fact-based, fact-driven, logical analysis behind a lot of these decisions. It's not all just pure subjectivity and pure racism and pure fear. It's the intersection of all these things that's the problem. And there's two sides to the equation that you have to look at. One side is the racist side, and the other side is the logical and factual side, okay? The racist side says that people will look at the same set of facts and make different decisions based upon the race of the defendant and also the race of the prosecutor, the defense attorney, and any witnesses involved with the case, okay? The logical side of it says that two people will look at the same set of facts and make a decision based upon the race of those involved, based on percentages, okay? It's really difficult to distinguish where the line is between racism and fact-driven, data-driven analysis, as long as the person or the object making that decision is capable of subjective thought. So there's some fuzzy room in there, okay, somewhere between those two things, but the simple fact is this, is that if you give a court the same evidence, the same arguments, the same case, but the defendant is black or white, okay, as long as the defendant is white, they have a higher chance of being found not guilty simply because they're white. That's a data-driven example of institutionalized racism, okay? The odds of a black defendant being found guilty for a crime are significantly higher than they are for a white. The odds for a minority defendant being found guilty are significantly higher than they are for a non-minority. And that's the reality of it. And then there's the other half of it, which is the fact that they're a minority means that the fact that they're found guilty has less significance in society. We live in a society where we have many people who sit here in our country who work and contribute to our society, but when on average they're in a group that contributes less, earns less, and takes more in taxes than another group, one simply has to take that into consideration when evaluating the pros and cons of finding that person guilty of a crime. It's that simple. And also the likelihood that they're going to commit a crime is that simple. I mean, these are data-driven things. These are not racist. These are data-driven. And when you start talking about skewing the data or ignoring the data because of the race of the defendant or whatever, that's applying racism to the data. But the data in and of itself is not racist. It's objective. Now, is the data the result of racism? Possibly. Is it the result of institutionalized wrongdoing in the sense of the government assuming more power than it should have, ignoring the Constitution in ways that it shouldn't, and basing all these decisions on the desire of the government to do more and more to combat crime, and superseding the constitutional rights of American citizens? Yes, okay, yes, it is, but it's still the data. And the problem is you can't ignore the data and also make objective decisions. We're in a sort of a downward spiral in that sense, where the more we talk about objectivity, the more we actually start legitimatizing racism, institutionalized racism, and an institutionalized power grab. We're in a severe catch-22 where we're making members of our society criminals simply because they're minorities, and then using the fact that they're minorities engaged in crime to justify more and more racism and more law enforcement and judicial activity to stop their criminal action, which is based on their race and nothing more. Furthermore, it has to be said that with this skewing of the judicial system and the resulting economic system and sociological interactions as a result of the quote-unquote increasing objectivity and increasing efforts to combat crime of the government, okay, that does have a negative effect to a certain degree on minorities and majorities both. Obviously, that would be skewed to more of an effect on minorities than on majorities. But the other issue is that majorities will always have a get-out-of-jail-free card. They will always be able to have a court decide that they're innocent, and a court decide they shouldn't, or a DA decide they shouldn't be charged, a police officer decide they won't even get involved in the case. And that kind of circulates around also because a lot of times police officers will not get involved in the case if they don't think the case would have a chance of being won in court by the prosecutor's office. They don't think the prosecutor will win the case, they won't pursue it in terms of pursuing police action against that case. So the police are quite aware of what happens in court when they go to court for a trial. And they are very aware that if there's little chance that a case, even if it's a clear violation of law, there's very little chance of a case actually winning a conviction, they won't pursue it. That's simple. And, there certainly are a number of circumstances where people are waved at by the cops or prosecuted, are pursued by the cops simply because the cops know that is going to result in a conviction or that is never going to result in a conviction. And these things all spiral around, they all interact, they all tie together. Believe me, it is not a simple case that you can make the law objective. It's not a simple case that you can make the government responsible and constitutionally faithful. And it's not a simple case that you can take the prejudice away from the population. It just isn't going to happen. And over time, these things are going to become more and more institutionalized. And frankly, when you're talking about 10% of the population, that's at the bottom of the economic ladder, frankly, you're going to have a lack of concern. It's that simple. We are just, people are just going to start saying, hey, that's how it is. Deal with it. Deal with it or leave. That's how it is. And you talk about the millions, billions of dollars wasted in legal fees and court time and the time and lost productivity of it with private individuals, trying to undo hundreds of years of institutionalized racism, in a society where the government is taking more and more power to stop crime. We reach a point where it just gets calcified. The pipes simply need to be changed, which could easily be interpreted as a terroristic threat against the United States government.